Hello everybody and welcome to breaking news here on the Chris Pritchard Cycling News Show. Now before we get into this massive, huge story coming out literally less than an hour ago, I've got to say there is a video coming out later recapping all of stage 17 and the rest of the stuff that's going off in the world of cycling. However, YouTube often like to kill off that second video. So if you've not done already, please hit that subscribe button, please hit that like button, and if you want your notifications to know when that video comes out, make sure you hit that notification bell. But bearing in mind, if you do, the title, the thumbnail may spoil it if you've not seen the highlights already. All right, so just come back later. After 5 p.m. sometime, there's going to be a second video recapping everything that went off in stage 17. And stage 17 today is going to be insane, mark my words. 2 whole category climbs, the first and only time the riders are going to go beyond 2,000 meters of climbing. So I have no idea what is going to happen. So make sure you head back later on this evening, get involved in the chat, let us know your opinions of stage 17. However, this news story right now, it needs a video all on its own, and here it is. So you've probably seen from the title and the thumbnail, it is official that Team Ineos Grenadiers this morning, less than an hour ago, announced that Egan Bernal has been withdrawn from this year's Tour de France. This comes after another torturous day in the mountains for Egan Bernal. Stage 16 saw him finish not in the main peloton, not in the main bunch, but in the gruppetto. And at one point in yesterday's stage, if you'd watched it live, you might have noticed he headed back to his team car, and I think this team car was behind the gruppetto at the time. He was back at the car. It looked potentially like he was having a discussion as to whether, shall I carry on or not? What's happening? But then all of a sudden, you saw him smiling, you saw him getting back into the group, and you thought, he's going to continue to the end. He's a fighter. He's going to commit to this. Yes, he's lost all this time, but potentially it opens him up to go on an audacious attack, potentially gives him the chance to go and try and get a stage victory, to try and recuperate some of those losses that Team Ineos are facing at this year's Tour de France. As I say, he finished in the gruppetto, which was 27 minutes and 27 seconds down from the eventual winner, Lennart Kemna, on stage 16. Now, I have been trying to get onto the Ineos website to try and get some more information, but as you can see here, this is what I'm faced with at the minute. So it appears that, well, I don't know, let's speculate. Ineos are trying to hide themselves. I don't know what's happening there. Clearly, everybody is trying to get on that website at the minute to find out exactly what is going on. But there was a tweet out from Team Ineos Grenadiers from Dave Brailsford saying, "We have taken this decision with Egan's best interests at heart. Egan is a true champion who loves to race, but he is also a young rider with many tours ahead of him, and at this point, on balance, we feel it's wiser for him to stop racing." Now, there's much speculation as to why he's been pulled out. I mean, hey, feel free to get in the comments down below and give us your own speculation as to why he's been pulled out. However, this has got to be down to that back injury. It has to be. Going back to the Dauphiné, he retired prior to stage 4 with a bad back, and it appears that that bad back just hasn't got any better. I don't know exactly what this injury is all about, how he sustained it, and how it's actually affected him. But I will say, however, Geraint Thomas did ride 3 weeks with a cracked pelvis. Primož Roglič suffered a big crash at the Dauphiné, pulled himself out of stage 5. Looked like he potentially might have injured himself pretty bad. He seems all right. And hey, listen, every injury is different. I'm just saying that you never know. And it seems that he's also developed a bit of a knee problem because of this back injury. So if he has been suffering this back injury, I can fully understand that he's been sitting funny on the bike. He's not been able to ride in his normal position. And as soon as you do that, as a professional rider, riding 6-7 hours a day, that's certainly going to put a few joints out of placement and potentially cause more problems further down the leg. And they're saying that he's on top of his back injury, he's now developed a bit of a knee injury as well. Now, if we look at a bit of that speculation, I know in the comments, a lot of people who've been mentioning Chris Horner, who's been saying that Egan Bernal has just overtrained. He's just come into it too fatigued and he was never going to get anywhere, and it's not necessarily that back injury. Now, if we go back into his Strava, because he often leaves his Strava open for everybody to see, we can look at his preparation at this year's Tour de France compared to last year's Tour de France. If you look at July 2020, 2,855 kilometres, 93 hours and 57 minutes, 41,000 metres climbed. Compare that to June of 2019, 2,382 kilometers. So he's done a hell of a lot less in June of last year. 79 hours, again, a lot less time on the bike. And you can see that he's actually climbed more meters back in 2019 than he did compared to 2020. If we go back another month, so May 2019 and June 2020, you can see here, I mean, look at the difference. 4,350 kilometers at 138 hours of training, nearly 50,000 meters of climbing, where back in 2019 in May he did 2,342 kilometers, 79, well, essentially 80 hours of training. Now I don't know if June 2020 should be compared more to April 2019, because you can see on that graph in April he did a hell of a lot more, and this potentially might have been the way his preparation went because of how the dates fell at this year's Tour de France compared to last year's Tour de France. As I say, it was the end of August for this one, it was the middle of July for the previous one. So let's just take a quick look at those stats for April of 2019 and compare them to June 2020. 3,433 kilometers of training, so he did a hell of a lot more in April than he did to May. He did 104 hours of training at 60,000 meters. So again, back in 2019, you'd think with the amount of climbing that was involved in this year's tour that he'd be doing more climbing in training, preparing himself for this year's tour, but clearly not. He did a lot of climbing in 2019. But even if you compare those two together, still the amount of work and the amount of effort that he's done in 2020 compared to 2019, way more. But you can see there in April of 2020, during lockdown, I presume, nothing. Does that mean he hid his data, or did he just not train? And you can see from December, he was coming off a bit of a big training block in December, and it had dropped down from January, February, March, and starting to get lower. And if that trajectory of that graph would carry on, then you would see that there would be less training in April, and then it'd kick back up again in June with that massive 138 hours of training. So I'm sure there's coaches out there who have spent years and years mastering the art of training riders. So let me pass it off to you, or if you're a rider who knows a lot about training, what do you think to these graphs? Do you think that he has simply overtrained? Do you think he's been trying to play catch up because of lockdown, and he's just fatigued himself? Don't forget, the guy is still a young rider, but you can't help thinking that what we're dealing with here is the 2019 Tour de France champion and Team Ineos Grenadiers, the best team in cycling. With Dave Brailsford, Tim Kerrison, you can't help thinking that they know what they're doing. And like I said a few months ago with this whole lockdown, that riders should have been able to keep their training even more specific, because a lot of it would have been done on the turbo, and yes, it would have sucked, but like, I know professional riders. I've seen Ben Swift, for instance, when he's injured, he'll spend 6 hours on the turbo. He'll spend 6 hours on the turbo in a mini little greenhouse that he's built for himself to keep the temperature up, to try and replicate what it's going to be like when he's back out on the road. So when it comes to Egan Bernal, this guy knows what he needs to do to make sure he is at the best possible shape he can be in for this year's Tour de France. Ineos know where he should be in terms of his training. So if he is overtrained, how the hell did they get it so wrong? Did he not listen to the coaches? Did the coaches think there's probably not going to be any racing, so don't worry too much about it, just go and have some fun and do whatever you want? And what Egan Bernal wanted was to just go and smash himself to bits in the Colombian hills for months on end. I don't know. But it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this one. There's so many questions that I want to ask about this. Do you think it is the right decision? Do you think it's a bit like when you were a kid at school and you were playing football, and the kid who had the ball, if he wasn't winning, he'd pick the ball up and he'd run off and no one else would get to play? Does it feel a bit like that with Team Ineos? They're not winning, they're not succeeding, so they're like, we're taking that ball now, we've had enough. We didn't want to win it anyway. I don't know. And then you've got to ask the question of that team selection. Was it the right team to take? Bearing in mind, yes, Egan Bernal might have been on better form than Geraint Thomas and Chris Froome, but they knew he was going into it with an injury. So did they know that, well, potentially they knew that he had this injury, he wasn't going to win the Tour, So they saved G and they saved Froome. I mean, Froome, like Bradley Wiggins said, he should be there on his experience alone. This Egan Bernal's only 22 years old. He needs those people around him, the Geraint Thomas, the Chris Froome, to, even if they're getting dropped, to at least be there with him, to at least give him their experience. And I think probably that's one of the reasons why Egan Bernal won last year, because he had Geraint Thomas by his side, helping him. But then on the other hand, he was going into it knowing he had an injury. Was it not worth bringing Geraint Thomas in, someone who clearly wanted to race the Tour de France, would be willing to help Egan Bernal to a certain degree, but as soon as he saw Egan getting dropped, you can't help thinking that Geraint Thomas would have ridden into enough form to be able to stay with that front group. Like Wiggins said, an off-form G is capable of being where Richie Porte is right now, and that might sound like a bit of a diss on Richie Porte, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's more of, let's not forget how good G is. And again, you're seeing him at the Tirreno Adriatico, riding himself into form. Chances are he's going to be up there for the Giro, but you can't help thinking that he would have preferred to have gone into the Tour de France as potentially second leader with Egan Bernal if anything like this happened. They've now got G to pick up the pieces and try and make it onto the podium. And I think that would have been a successful tour for Team Ineos Grenadiers, being on that podium, rather than winning. They clearly weren't going to win when Jumbo-Visma were doing what they were doing prior to the Tour de France. Again, anything could still happen, and you might end up finding out that Jumbo-Visma don't actually end up winning this tour. But anyway, let me know your thoughts down below on this story. Egan Bernal is out of this year's Tour de France. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, please hit that subscribe button, and don't forget, there is a video coming out later on this evening with all the highlights, all the fallout from stage 17. You're not going to want to miss it, so hit that notification bell if you've not done already, and I'll see you in a little while.